When we attempt to grasp the fall of the Roman Empire, the mind defaults to spectacle. We imagine the sacking of Rome, the clash of swords, the grand final battle where the greatest power on earth was overcome by barbarians at the gate. We picture the glory ending in fire and steel. But history tells us that this narrative is fundamentally incomplete and dangerously misleading. The truth, the brutal, uncomfortable truth, is that the Roman Empire was not destroyed by external force. It collapsed under the weight of its own balance sheet. It fell because its currency died, because its financial system had been hollowed out, and because its leaders made the same predictable mistakes that are being repeated in the modern world today. Rome's collapse was not a sudden event. It was a long, slow unraveling of financial trust. It was not conquered by strong armies, but quietly hollowed out by financial addiction. The legions marched outward, but the real killer was always inside the treasury. The reason this story matters now is chillingly simple. Rome ran the financial experiment first, and the results are an ironclad blueprint for total collapse. The corruption that shattered the silver denarius is the same corruption currently eroding your dollar, your savings, and your faith in the future. If you seek financial freedom, you must recognize this ancient blueprint because every empire thinks it's different until the math finally stops.
For centuries, Rome's economic miracle rested on one object, the silver denarius. This small coin was confidence in metal form, pure, trusted, and backed by the might of the empire. It was the physical embodiment of the imperial power that the legions fought to defend. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its money. The Romans lived by certain rules, unspoken laws about how wealth, debt, and value actually worked. Their first rule laid the foundation for every trick that would follow. Money Rule 1. All money is political. The Romans knew what modern economists pretend to forget. Money is never neutral. It's not just a tool for trade. It is a declaration of power. Every coin minted was a message. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, mastered this psychological warfare. After years of bloody civil war, he didn't just rebuild the state, he rebuilt trust. His solution was the coin itself. He flooded the empire with silver denarii bearing his face and the word pax, peace. Every transaction reminded Romans who had restored order. A few decades later, Emperor Nero, after allegedly burning half of Rome, used his coins to show rebuilt temples and overflowing cornucopias, money as direct propaganda, telling the people the empire was thriving even when the streets were still in ashes. The message was clear. Your wealth exists because your ruler exists. That's why every regime fought for control of the mint. Whoever made the money controlled the story. 2,000 years later, the faces and medals have changed, but the theater hasn't. Whether it is Divine Augustus or In God We Trust, the principle remains. Money is propaganda you can spend. Beneath the shine of the silver denarius, Rome was structurally fragile. The wealth of the empire didn't come from productivity or innovation. It came from conquest. War paid for itself. As long as Rome kept winning, new slaves, new mines, and new taxes flowed in. But what happens when you build an economy on perpetual expansion? And expansion stops. The state needed a new, more efficient engine. It found it in debt. Money Rule 2. Debt is power. Rome was built on credit. Every layer of its society, from farmers to emperors, ran on borrowed money. But this was not just a favor. It was enforceable with brutal consequences. Citizens who couldn't pay could lose their property, their land, or even their freedom. Debtors could literally be sold into slavery. The Latin word obligatio meant both debt and bond. The elite learned early that lending was political. Credit was a tool to control the population without sending soldiers.
Keep citizens owing, and they'll keep obeying. By the time of the late Republic, the small farmers and citizen soldiers, the very backbone of the legions, were being crushed by debt and losing their land to the wealthy senatorial class, who absorbed them into vast, slave-powered estates called latifundia. The elites chose the concentration of their own wealth over the stability of the Republic. The emperors inherited this crisis. They used debt like modern governments use stimulus to buy loyalty, to delay collapse, and to keep the machine running one more year. The irony is eternal. The empire with all the gold in the world was always broke. Rome didn't have a debt problem, it had a dependency problem. And today, we are living in the sequel, where mortgages, credit cards, and student loans replace the chains of obligatio, but the control mechanism remains the same. Money Rule 3, luxury, is a virus. As the empire grew fat, discipline died. Rome's culture shifted from simplicity to spectacle. The state became a machine of consumption. Gold leaf ceilings replaced wooden roofs. Senators competed to outspend each other on banquets, perfumes, and peacocks. The trade deficit became catastrophic. Roman coins poured east to pay for imported silks and exotic goods. The empire was bleeding wealth, not from war, but from indulgence. The philosophers saw it happening in real time. Cato the Elder warned that a republic obsessed with luxury would rot from within. Seneca warned that wealth is the slave of the wise man and the master of the fool. But no one listened, because when comfort becomes culture, discipline becomes impossible. The people forgot how to live without excess. When the economy stumbled, no one remembered restraint. Spain, centuries later, would repeat this exact mistake as New World silver fed consumption instead of production, leading to default and collapse.
The combination of massive military costs, crippling debt, and an unsustainable trade deficit finally pushed the financial system to its breaking point. When the gold reserves could no longer keep pace, the emperors faced a fatal choice: raise taxes, politically dangerous, cut army pay, risk a coup, or choose the final insidious path: debasement. Money Rule 4, inflation destroys empires. Starting under Nero in 64 AD, Rome began cutting the silver content of the denarius with cheap copper. The coins looked the same on the surface, but their real value was vanishing. This was the ultimate financial trick, a government turning itself into a counterfeiter. The numbers illustrate the structural decay. Under Augustus, c. 14 AD, the denarius was nearly 95% pure silver. Under Nero, c. 64 AD, it dropped to 90%. Under Caracalla, c. 215 AD, it plummeted to around 50%. During the crisis of the 3rd century, c. 260 AD, the coin contained less than 5% silver. It was a bronze disc with a thin, deceptive silver wash. This was inflation by stealth, a silent and invisible tax levied without consent. It paid the state's bills by secretly stealing wealth from every citizen's pocket. The economic response was swift and brutal, perfectly demonstrating Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good money. People were not fools. They could feel the difference. Merchants demanded 2 of the debased coins for what 1 pure coin used to buy. Citizens quickly hoarded the older, pure silver coins, the good money, and spent the worthless, debased coins as quickly as possible. The empire's currency, once its unifier, was now actively tearing it apart. Rome thought it could trick its people by issuing coins that looked the same but contained less real value. Modern governments think they can do the same by printing paper, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debts. But the outcome is always the same. The destruction of money is always the destruction of empires.
The endemic inflation and the broken social contract led to a catastrophic death spiral of trust. Money Rule 5. When people stop believing in money, they stop believing in power. By the 3rd century, prices soared uncontrollably. The life savings of generations were wiped out. Pensions turned to dust. Farmers abandoned their lands rather than pay taxes demanded in coins that were worthless. Trade networks, Rome's greatest achievement, shattered, reverting to a primitive state of barter. Money was no longer an abstraction, it was kindling. In a desperate, final attempt to restore order, Emperor Diocletian issued his infamous Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD, fixing the cost of over 1,000 goods and services, with death as the penalty for violation. This move was a spectacular failure. No decree can stop economic panic. Merchants, unable to sell their goods at the artificially low fixed prices, simply pulled them off the market, causing catastrophic shortages and driving all commerce onto a massive black market. The empire had officially replaced trust with force, always the last stage before collapse. The empire didn't run out of money, it ran out of belief. Loyalty to the distant imperial power vanished. Citizens bound themselves to local powerful lords for protection, giving rise to the very foundation of European feudalism. The barbarians who finally walked through the gates in 476 AD were not toppling a mighty empire. They were simply pushing over a hollowed-out, rotted financial frame. Currency collapse was its sharpest thread of unraveling.
We like to believe that modern technology has made us immune to Rome's mistakes. We think our central banks are smarter, more disciplined, and more independent than Nero's corrupted mint masters. This is the modern delusion. Today, the technology has changed, but the fundamental incentives have not. We no longer clip silver from coins. Central banks print digital trillions. We call it quantitative easing or monetary policy, but it is the same financial trick, pretending that creating more symbols creates more wealth. The parallels between Rome and the modern fiat system are not theoretical. They are the working blueprint for our own systemic fragility. 1. Debasement versus detethering, 1971. The Roman emperors debased the denarius by adding copper. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the last link between the U.S. dollar and a tangible anchor, gold, turning it into pure fiat, money backed only by government promise. This act, the Nixon shock, gave the modern state a complete and total monopoly over the creation of money via a simple keystroke. Just like Rome, the temptation to spend beyond means became irresistible. The dollar has since lost 85% of its value, a slow-motion collapse. 2. Debt addiction. Rome was addicted to debt to fund wars and consumption. Today, global debt exceeds $300 trillion, more than 3 times world GDP. Interest payments alone are now crowding out critical national budgets like defense and education. Just like the Roman emperors, modern governments choose the path of least resistance, more printing to delay the reckoning. Borrowing is the system, not a bug. 3. The Cantillon effect, modern silent tax. Rome's debasement was a silent tax. Today, this is perpetuated by the Cantillon effect. When new money is printed, QE, it flows first to the financial elite, banks, asset owners, and speculators. They buy up assets at yesterday's prices, benefiting instantly. By the time that money trickles down to ordinary citizens as wages, inflation has already soared, leaving the middle class to absorb the rising cost of living. You receive the inflation, they receive the wealth. 4. Price controls and denial. Diocletian's edict fixing prices failed disastrously. In modern times, the denial is subtler. Officials dismiss inflation as transitory or temporary market noise, assuring everyone the system is fine, even as costs rise faster than wages. They pretend that numbers on a spreadsheet can substitute for food, energy, or trust. Rome's collapse was simply the earliest full-scale example, the blueprint for every inflationary disaster since, from Weimar Germany's wheelbarrows of marks to Zimbabwe's trillion-dollar notes.
Each collapse follows the same 4 stages: debt spiral, denial, devaluation, and destruction. The Western Roman Empire was gone by 476 AD, but the financial system it helped create, one based on perpetual debt, centralized power, and the illusion of value, never left. The modern world runs on digital trust, the idea that a string of numbers in a database equals real wealth. That number's value depends entirely on the same fragile confidence loop created centuries ago. The final warning from Rome is not about what we fight, but what we hold. When money loses value, loyalty to the empire vanishes. When the story of money breaks, every empire discovers the same brutal financial truth. The system always prioritizes survival over fairness. Bailouts and money printing are not solutions. They are mechanisms to preserve the existing hierarchy by transferring losses to the many. Real wealth is not paper. The families who survived Rome's collapse did not survive on debased coins or paper promises. They survived with real assets, skills, and resources, land that still produced food, tools that could create value, and networks of trust that could facilitate barter. Wealth built on paper or digits can vanish with the flick of an interest rate. Real wealth, productive value, cannot be printed away. The collapse is already digitized. Today, the modern state seeks total control over the money supply through digital currencies, CBDCs, which promise efficiency but deliver programmable value and surveillance. This is the digital echo of 1933, when FDR seized private gold. The government is preparing for the day trust fails by ensuring compliance through code, not coercion. The question is whether you will face this cycle blind or awake. The Romans ran this experiment first. They destroyed the world's greatest empire, debased its money, drowned in its debt, and called it destiny. Don't make the same mistake. Stop confusing credit with creation, consumption with culture, and illusion with reality. Financial freedom starts not with chasing numbers, but with understanding the structural patterns of power and debt that are designed to extract wealth. If you don't understand it, history will crush you all the same.